The apex predators left her with 10 rounds and a knife. It was their final mistake. HFY Scifi best. The planet of Xanthias was a place where no human was meant to survive. The planet's thick jungles were alive with monstrous creatures, and the mountains were jagged and unforgiving. It wasn't the kind of place where a spaceship could make a safe landing. Yet Mara had found herself here, not by choice, but because of a cruel twist of fate. Her ship had crashed into the dense forest, its systems failing in mid-flight. The wreckage was scattered across a vast expanse of the jungle, with no sign of any other survivors. When she emerged from the wreckage, dazed and bleeding, Mara knew one thing for sure: she had to survive. The Sracs, an elite race of apex predators, had been watching her since her arrival. They were known throughout the galaxy for their brutal hunting practices. The Sracs had no compassion, no mercy, and no fear. They only cared about one thing: the thrill of the hunt. And to them, Mara was just another piece of prey, a weak human that would be easy to track and kill. The Sracs had sent a small hunting party to capture her. When they arrived, they didn't see her as a threat. To them, Mara was nothing more than a challenge, a chance to test their skills. They had surrounded her, laughing at how helpless she looked. "You're not worth our time, human," one of the Sracs hunters had growled, his voice thick with amusement. "We'll leave you with a knife and 10 rounds. That's all you deserve." They had tossed the items at her feet, a knife and a small handgun, then stepped back, waiting for her to make her move. But Mara didn't panic. She wasn't afraid. She had survived worse. With a steady breath, she bent down to pick up the knife first. It was basic, a simple combat blade, but it felt solid in her hands. The handgun, small but deadly, was her real weapon. 10 rounds, that's all she had. But it was enough. The Sracs were already beginning to spread out, circling her like wolves. Mara could hear their low growls as they stalked her, their eyes glowing in the shadows of the dense jungle. She could feel the weight of their presence pressing in on her. They were powerful, faster, and stronger than anything she had ever faced. But she wasn't just any human. She had trained for situations like this her whole life. Survival was in her blood. She scanned the area, looking for anything she could use. The jungle around her was thick with trees, vines, and rocks. There were plenty of places to hide, to set up traps. Her mind was already working, planning her next move. The Sracs had underestimated her, and that was their first mistake. Mara didn't waste time. She sprinted toward a thick patch of trees, using their trunks as cover. The Sracs followed, their footsteps heavy on the ground. She could hear them getting closer. She didn't have much time. She found a high branch that overlooked the path the Sracs were following. With quick hands, she climbed up, taking care not to make a sound. The Sracs moved below her, their eyes scanning the area, but they didn't look up. Mara waited, watching them from above. Her heart was steady, her breathing slow. She was calm. The Sracs were getting closer to her position, and she knew the moment was near. She gripped the knife in one hand and the handgun in the other, preparing for the right time to strike. It was one of the hunters, a tall figure with dark, muscular limbs, who first passed beneath her. Mara's eyes locked on him, her mind calculating every detail. With a swift motion, she dropped from the branch, landing silently behind him. Before he could react, she thrust the knife into his side, slicing through his thick skin with ease. The Sracs roared in pain, but Mara was already moving. She pulled the knife out and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe from the hunter's massive claws. The hunter lunged again, but Mara was faster. She fired a round from the handgun, striking him in the shoulder. The Srac staggered, his growl turning into a screech of pain. He fell to the ground, dead. Mara didn't have time to savor the victory. The others would be on her in seconds. She had killed one, but the rest would be more cautious. They weren't like her, they didn't think the same way. The Sracs had one goal: to kill, but Mara was different. She had to think. She had to be smart. The remaining Sracs were already closing in on her. Mara could hear their growls, feel their eyes on her. They were getting closer, but she was ready. She had to act fast. She sprinted again, this time towards a dense thicket of bushes, hoping to lose them for a moment. But they were smart. They didn't follow her directly. They spread out, surrounding her in a wide circle. They were closing in from all sides. Mara's heart raced, but she didn't let the fear take over. She glanced at her gun, only 9 rounds left. If she was going to survive, she had to make every shot count. Her mind raced as she planned her next move. She spotted a tall rock formation nearby, just high enough for her to gain the advantage. Without hesitation, she sprinted towards it, weaving through the jungle, her feet light on the ground. The Sracs followed, growling louder now, sensing their prey's movement. But Myra was quicker. She reached the rock, climbing it with surprising speed. Her boots found purchase on the rough surface, and she pulled herself up, using the knife to help her grip. When she reached the top, she turned to face the Sracs. The predators were now beneath her, snarling and pacing. They were frustrated, confused. They had expected an easy kill, but Mara had outsmarted them. One of the hunters, the largest of the group, began to climb the rock. He was faster than the others, and Mara knew he was the leader. He would be the biggest threat, but she was ready. She waited for him to get close, aiming the handgun at his chest. The Srac saw her too late, and in that instant she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and the predator let out a roar of pain as he fell back. His massive form hit the ground with a thud, the sound echoing through the jungle. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't take her eyes off the remaining hunters. The Sracs were beginning to regroup, and Mara knew she didn't have long before they attacked again. They wouldn't give her another chance. She was their prey, and they would stop at nothing to finish the hunt. But Mara wasn't afraid. She wasn't just some weak human. She was a fighter, and the Sracs had made the mistake of thinking otherwise. With a deep breath, she prepared herself for the next move. The hunt wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. Mara crouched behind the rock, breathing heavily but steadily. She had done it. She had taken down the largest of the Sracs, the leader of the pack, with one shot. The rest of the hunters were still below her, growling and pacing, unsure of what to do next. They hadn't expected her to be so resourceful, so dangerous. But Mara was far from finished. She knew this victory wouldn't last long. The Sracs were relentless, and they didn't back down easily. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. There were still 9 rounds left in her handgun, 9 chances to make them regret underestimating her. From her vantage point on the rock, she could see the rest of the hunters, their eyes narrowed and their muscles tense. The remaining Sracs were taller, more powerful than anything Mara had ever seen. They looked like massive beasts, their skin tough and their movements swift. But Mara knew something they didn't. She had the advantage of knowledge. She had learned how to survive in hostile environments, how to think ahead, and how to outsmart her enemies. The Sracs weren't invincible. They were predators, yes, but Mara wasn't their typical prey. She wasn't just going to sit there and wait to be hunted. She was going to turn the tables on them. One of the Sracs, a leaner hunter with dark red scales, moved first. It darted to the side, trying to flank Mara, but she was already prepared. She waited, watching, her eyes fixed on its movements. The creature was fast, but not fast enough. As it crept closer, Mara took aim. Her hand was steady as she fired the first round. The shot hit its shoulder, and the Sracs let out a screech of pain. It stumbled back, clutching at the wound. Mara didn't hesitate. She fired again, this time hitting the creature in the chest. It fell to the ground with a thud, dead. The remaining Sracs roared in anger, their eyes flashing with fury, but Mara wasn't done yet. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was trying to show them that humans weren't weak, that they weren't just prey. She was fighting for something more than her own life. She was fighting for every human who had ever been underestimated, every person who had ever been written off as insignificant. The other hunters moved back, clearly recalculating their strategy. Mara could hear their growls, low and menacing, as they circled around the rock. They were smart and they were angry. They had underestimated her, but now they were cautious. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. Mara's mind raced as she thought through her options. The handgun had only 8 rounds left. She couldn't waste them. Her knife would be useful if she could get close enough, but she needed a plan. She needed to outsmart them, to make them play into her hands. She glanced around, looking for any sign of weakness. The jungle around her was dense, with thick trees and tangled vines. There were shadows everywhere, places to hide, places to trap them. But the Sracs were hunters. They would follow her, track her every move. Mara had to keep them off balance, keep them guessing. Then she saw it, a small ledge about 10 feet away, just high enough to give her another advantage. If she could get there, she might have the upper hand. But she'd have to move quickly, and the Sracs would be right behind her. Mara didn't wait. She dashed across the jungle floor, her footsteps light and fast. The Sracs were quick to respond, but Mara had already anticipated their movements. One of the hunters, a smaller creature with silver scales, lunged toward her, its claws outstretched. But Mara was faster. She slid to the side, narrowly avoiding its strike, and fired a shot at its chest. The creature stumbled back, but it wasn't down yet. Mara quickly grabbed a branch from the ground and threw it into the jungle, distracting the remaining S-Racks. They turned, momentarily confused, and that gave her just enough time to reach the ledge. She climbed swiftly, pulling herself up with a grunt. Her fingers burned from the effort, but she ignored the pain. When she reached the top, she took a moment to catch her breath, her eyes scanning the area below her. The S-Racks were regrouping, slowly moving back into position, but now they had to face her from above. She had the high ground, and that made all the difference. The S-Racks were beginning to realize that they weren't just dealing with an ordinary prey. Mara had killed 2 of them already, and she had escaped their traps. They had never encountered a human like her before. They were losing control of the situation, and that was something they couldn't stand. One of the S-Racks, a massive creature with deep blue scales and long, sharp horns, let out a loud roar. It was the largest of them all, and it was clearly their leader. It turned to the others, barking orders in their guttural language. Mara didn't understand their words, but she could see the tension in their movements. They were ready for the final push. Mara felt a rush of adrenaline. She had no intention of giving up now. She was so close to victory she could feel it in her bones. She wasn't going to let these monsters take her down. Not today, not ever. The leader of the S-Racks began to move, his massive feet shaking the ground beneath him. The others followed, and soon the entire pack was charging toward the ledge. Mara took aim with her handgun, her eyes fixed on the leader. She fired once, twice, but both shots missed. The leader was too fast, and he knew how to dodge her attacks. He was closing the distance, and if she didn't act quickly, he would be on her in seconds. Mara's mind raced. She had to think, had to find a way to stop him. She glanced around again, looking for anything that could help her. And then she saw it, a large boulder, hanging precariously from the edge of a cliff above her. Without a second thought, she grabbed her knife and began to cut through the vines that were holding the boulder in place. The S-Racks were almost upon her now, their growls growing louder, their eyes filled with bloodlust. But Mara didn't flinch. She knew this was her only chance. With one final tug, the boulder came loose, crashing down toward the leader of the S-Racks. He barely had time to react before the massive stone struck him, sending him tumbling backward. The other S-Racks screeched in surprise, their attack faltering as they watched their leader fall. Mara didn't wait for them to recover. She fired another round from her handgun, taking down the closest S-Rack's hunter. The others scattered, disoriented and furious. But Mara had the upper hand. She had turned their own aggression against them, and now they were on the defensive. She didn't waste any time. She climbed down from the ledge and sprinted toward the next patch of trees, her heart pounding. The S-Racks were already regrouping, but this time Mara was ready. She had learned their patterns, their weaknesses. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was hunting them. The chase had begun. Mara's body ached from the constant movement. Her muscles burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she couldn't stop. Not now. The S-Racks were regathering, their roars echoing through the dense jungle. She could hear their heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, but she kept running, dodging trees and vines, each movement calculated, each step leading her further into the unknown. She needed to find another advantage, and fast. Her mind raced as she moved. The remaining hunters were ruthless and relentless, but they were starting to underestimate her. They had thought she was an easy target, something to be toyed with. They hadn't realized that humans, when pushed to the edge, became something far more dangerous than any predator. She had already taken down 3 of them, and the S-Racks were starting to panic. Their arrogance was beginning to crumble. Mara stopped for a brief moment, pressing her back against a thick tree trunk. She could hear them closing in, but they were still unaware of her position. The fog of the jungle surrounded her, making it harder for them to track her. The thick canopy of leaves above provided some cover from their watchful eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, focusing her mind. The handgun had only 5 rounds left. The knife was still in her hand, but it was no longer her primary weapon. She needed to conserve her ammo. She needed to outthink them, not just outfight them. The jungle was a maze. If she could lead them into the thickest part, into the swampy, muddled ground where their heavy bodies couldn't move quickly, she might stand a chance. Her mind clicked into survival mode, recalling everything she had learned over the years. The terrain here was harsh, but it was her only ally. Mara didn't waste any more time. She sprinted forward, zigzagging through the trees to confuse the Sracs. Their senses were sharp but not infallible. They would follow her, but if she could make them chase her in the wrong direction, she might have enough time to find another place to set a trap. She reached the edge of a dense swamp, the ground soggy and uneven. She hesitated for a moment, listening to the sounds of the jungle. The Sracs were still coming. They were close, but not close enough. They had made the mistake of spreading out again, thinking they could corner her from all sides, but Myra knew they were wrong. Her plan was simple. She would lead them into the swamp and let the thick muck slow them down. Once they were deep enough, she would pick them off one by one. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the best option she had. Myra moved silently through the dense foliage, crouching low to the ground. The swamp was darker than the rest of the jungle, the air heavy with moisture. She could feel the muck beneath her boots, the smell of rot and decay filling her nostrils. It wasn't the most pleasant environment, but it would work to her advantage. The Sracs weren't built for this. Their large, muscular frames would become their weakness in this terrain. She found a good position near a cluster of tall reeds. From here, she could see the entrance to the swamp, where the Sracs were beginning to make their way in. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and their growls grew louder as they approached. Mara's heart raced, but she kept herself steady. She couldn't afford any mistakes now. She had to be calm, she had to be precise. The first hunter, a large male with green scales, was the first to step into the swamp. His massive feet sunk into the soft earth, but he didn't seem to mind. He was focused on the hunt. The other Sracs followed, their eyes scanning the area, their movements more cautious now. They had learned to be careful, but they were still making the mistake of assuming they could track her easily. Mara waited until they were deep enough into the swamp, their legs sinking into the muck. She could hear their grunts and growls as they struggled to move. The sound of their frustration made her smile. They were used to being in control, but now they were the ones at a disadvantage. With a deep breath, Mara took aim at the green-scaled Sracs. Her shot was quick, efficient. The round hit him in the shoulder, and he staggered backward with a roar of pain. The others reacted immediately, their eyes flashing with rage as they turned toward the source of the shot. But Mara was already moving, darting from her hiding place and into the thick foliage. The Sracs were enraged now, their senses heightened by the pain of their wounded comrade. They spread out, growling and sniffing the air, but Mara was already gone. She used the thick trees and swampy ground to her advantage, staying just out of sight. They couldn't move as fast as they wanted to, and the thick mud slowed their progress. But that didn't mean they were out of the game. Myra took another shot, this time hitting a smaller hunter in the leg. It fell with a screech, its body sinking into the muck. The remaining Sracs howled in fury, their hunt turning into a desperate pursuit. The swamp was becoming more of a maze for them, and Mara knew she had to move quickly before they figured out how to adapt. She took cover behind a large fallen tree, breathing hard. She couldn't stop now, there were only 3 left. The biggest one, the blue-scaled leader, was still out there, and Mara knew he wouldn't be easy to take down, but she was ready. She had the advantage now. The Sracs were slow, their pride and arrogance had already cost them 2 of their own, and Mara wasn't about to let up. As she peered over the tree, she saw the leader's glowing eyes in the distance. He was looking for her, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. He was a massive creature with long, sharp horns that curled up from his head. His skin was tough, almost impenetrable. Myra knew it wouldn't be easy to take him down, but she also knew that he was just another predator, just another hunter, and he would fall like the others. Myra didn't wait for him to get closer. She fired another round, striking one of the smaller hunters in the chest. It let out a scream as it fell backward, its body sinking into the swamp. The leader roared in fury, his eyes fixed on Mara's position. He was coming. He was ready to finish this. Mara gripped her knife tightly, her heart racing. This would be the final confrontation. She couldn't afford to miss. She had only 4 rounds left, and she knew she had to make them count. She stepped back, moving deeper into the swamp, away from the leader's charge. He was faster than the others, but he was also more reckless. That would be his mistake. The leader was nearly upon her now, his massive frame charging through the thick mud. He was roaring, a deep guttural sound that shook the air. Mara aimed her handgun, watching him as he closed in. She waited for the perfect moment. When he was just a few feet away, Mara fired. The shot hit him in the chest, but it didn't stop him. The leader was too powerful. He slammed into her, knocking her to the ground. Mara gasped for air as she hit the muck, her body pinned beneath the weight of the massive predator. His claws slashed at the air above her, and she could feel the heat of his breath. With one final burst of energy, Mara drove the knife deep into his side. The leader screeched in pain, his claws raking at her skin. But Mara didn't let go. She twisted the knife, and with one final effort, she drove it up into his heart. The leader's roar turned into a strangled gasp, and then he collapsed, his massive body crumpling onto the ground. Mara pushed him off, gasping for air as she lay in the muck, covered in blood and sweat. It was over. The Sraks were defeated. Mara lay in the swamp, her breath coming in short gasps as she stared at the leader of the Sraks, his massive body sprawled in the muck beside her. Blood and sweat mixed with the dirt and grime of the jungle, but she didn't care. She had done it. The fight was over. The Sraks were no longer a threat. But even as the adrenaline began to fade, Mara couldn't let her guard down. There were still dangers to face, and she couldn't afford to relax just yet. The other two hunters had already been dealt with, but the jungle was full of unknowns. Her body ached from the constant running, from the bruises and cuts that now covered her skin, but she had to keep moving. She had survived the Sraks, but the real test would come next. Mara slowly rose to her feet, her legs shaking with the effort. She felt the weight of the handgun in her hand, the last of her rounds dwindling. She checked the clip, 3 bullets left. The knife was still at her side, but she knew she needed more than just weapons to survive here. She needed to think, to be smarter than the jungle itself. The swamp was silent now, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. The Sraks were no more, but the jungle still felt alive, as though it were watching her every move. She had to get out of here. She couldn't stay in one place for too long. She had no idea if there were more Sraks hunting parties out there, or if other predators would pick up her trail. She turned away from the fallen leader and began to move. Every step was cautious, each one taken with the knowledge that danger could be lurking just around the corner. She made her way back toward the edge of the swamp, where the trees grew thicker and the ground was more solid. The swamp had been her battleground, but now she needed higher ground, somewhere that offered more cover and better visibility. The air was heavy with humidity, and the thick vegetation made it hard to see far ahead. Mara pushed through the underbrush, moving quietly but swiftly. Her mind was already planning her next steps, scanning for any signs of danger. She couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, but that feeling was short-lived. The jungle was a place where any moment of weakness could be deadly. As she pushed forward, she spotted a large rock formation in the distance. It looked like a good place to stop and assess her situation. She could get some height there, maybe spot any movement around her. She needed a moment to think, to figure out what came next. Reaching the base of the rocks, she climbed up, using the jagged edges for leverage. Her muscles were sore from the constant strain, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. She finally reached the top, where she paused to catch her breath and survey the land below. From this vantage point, Mara could see the full scope of the jungle stretching out before her. It was vast and unyielding, but it also gave her a sense of control. She could see movement in the distance, some creatures darting through the trees, the shadows shifting with the breeze. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. As she scanned the horizon, a small part of her felt the weight of her isolation. She had made it this far, but the planet was still vast and dangerous. She was alone, with no way of knowing when or if a rescue would come. The thought of being stuck on this planet indefinitely was a grim reality, but it was a reality she would face with grit and determination. Her mind returned to the fight she had just won. She had killed the leader of the Sraks, and the others had fallen before her. She had proved that humanity wasn't weak, that humans could stand their ground when it mattered. But that victory came with a price. The Sraks had been relentless, and they hadn't underestimated her again. If there were more predators on this planet, she couldn't afford to be complacent. The sound of a twig snapping behind her broke her from her thoughts. Instantly, she spun around, her handgun raised, her body tensed for another fight. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the area. She couldn't see anything, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Her senses were on high alert now, and she knew she couldn't take any chances. She crouched low, moving to the edge of the rock formation and peering down into the jungle below. Her eyes darted from shadow to shadow, watching for any signs of movement. Nothing. The jungle was silent again, but Mara knew better than to let her guard down. She was no longer just a prey animal to be hunted. She was the hunter now. She had learned the Srax's ways, and she could use that knowledge to her advantage. She climbed down from the rocks and moved through the trees, keeping to the shadows. She didn't know what had made the noise behind her, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Every step she took was deliberate, each one leading her closer to her goal. She wasn't sure what that goal was yet, whether it was survival, escape, or something else entirely. But she knew that she couldn't stop. Not now. Her journey through the jungle continued with her mind focused on survival. She didn't have much left in terms of supplies, and the longer she stayed on this planet, the more dangerous it became. Every animal, every plant, every sound in the jungle was a potential threat. But Mara wasn't afraid. She had survived the Srax, and she could survive anything this planet threw at her. As she moved deeper into the jungle, she kept her eyes peeled for any signs of life. The jungle was thick, the trees towering overhead, but she had to keep moving. The day was fading, and night would soon fall. Mara needed to find shelter before the dark made the jungle even more dangerous. She finally came across a small clearing where the trees parted enough to let in a bit of light. There was a small, fast-moving stream running through the middle, the water sparkling in the fading daylight. Myra approached it cautiously, kneeling to drink from it. The cool water felt good on her parched throat, but she didn't allow herself to get too comfortable. She was still on edge, still aware that the jungle was full of threats. After a moment, she stood up, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She had to keep moving. She couldn't afford to rest for long. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the jungle. This time, it wasn't a twig snapping or a creature moving in the distance. It was a hum, a low, mechanical sound, distant but unmistakable. Myra froze, her heart skipping a beat. A ship. It had to be. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was too structured, too rhythmic. Mara's breath quickened as she turned in the direction of the sound. She didn't know if it was a rescue ship or something else, but she had to find out. She needed help, and this might be her only chance to get off this planet. Without hesitation, Mara ran toward the sound, pushing through the thick jungle, her focus sharp and her pace quickening. She wasn't going to stop now. The Srax had tried to break her, but they had failed. Now a new challenge lay ahead, survival and escape. The jungle seemed to stretch endlessly in front of her, but Mara's determination burned brighter than ever. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop. The hum of the ship grew louder, and for the first time since she crash-landed on this hostile planet, Myra felt hope stir within her. The hunt was over, but the real battle had only just begun. The hum of the ship was now unmistakable, and Myra's heart raced with anticipation. She pushed herself harder, her breath coming in ragged bursts as she darted between trees and over thick vines, her focus locked on the sound. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored them. The jungle seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing deeper as the sun dipped below the horizon. But the hum of the ship was her guide, and she followed it with everything she had left. Her mind raced, considering the possibilities. Was it a rescue ship? Or was it something else entirely? There were so many unknowns in the galaxy, so many dangers that even a human like her couldn't predict. But at this moment, nothing mattered more than reaching that sound. Myra's legs were sore from the constant running, her body drenched in sweat and dirt. The environment was taking its toll, but her determination pushed her forward. The Srax were gone, their dead bodies scattered across the jungle, but that victory had come at a cost. She had no idea how much longer she could last without more supplies, without shelter, without help. She had to reach that ship, or her chances of survival on this brutal planet would dwindle to nothing. The trees started to thin out as she neared the source of the hum. She could now make out the shape of a ship, large and sleek, its dark silhouette standing out against the fading light. It was hovering above a small clearing, its engines making a steady, low noise. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a ship, and it was close. But something felt off. The air was thick with tension, and Mara's instincts screamed at her to be cautious. She slowed her pace, moving more carefully now, keeping to the shadows as she approached the ship. The last thing she needed was to walk straight into an ambush. She peered through the thick underbrush, watching the ship. There was no sign of movement, no people standing outside waiting to greet her. No lights flashing, no sign of life. Just the hum of the ship's engines and the quiet, empty clearing. Myra felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She couldn't explain it, but something didn't feel right. The ship was too still, too quiet. Her mind raced, considering all the possibilities. Was it a trap? Were the S-Racks waiting for her, or had someone else found her and set this up as a bait? She had learned to trust her instincts, and they were telling her to be careful. She took a step back and moved around to the other side of the ship, using the thick foliage to conceal her movements. Her hand gripped the handle of her handgun, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Every part of her body was tense, prepared for whatever might come next. As she crept closer, she saw a hatch on the side of the ship. It was open, slightly ajar, just enough for her to slip through. She hesitated for a moment, considering her options. The last thing she wanted was to walk into an unknown situation without knowing what was waiting for her. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't afford to turn back now. She had to take the risk. Mara took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead, and slipped through the hatch. Inside, the ship was dimly lit, the walls a smooth, metallic surface. There were no signs of life. The interior was silent except for the low hum of the engines, which seemed louder now that she was inside. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that might indicate who owned the ship, what its purpose was, or if it was even meant for her. The cockpit was at the front of the ship, but she didn't go there immediately. She needed to make sure the ship was truly empty. She moved quietly, checking the compartments, listening for any movement. Everything seemed undisturbed, which only made her feel more uneasy. A ship like this should have had some sign of life, even if it was just the hum of automated systems. Her hand hovered over the control panel in one of the side rooms, and she quickly accessed the ship systems. There was no response. No navigation logs, no incoming or outgoing signals. It was as though the ship had been abandoned, left to drift in this remote part of the jungle. Mara's heart sank. The ship wasn't a rescue ship. It wasn't even operational. It was nothing but a hollow shell, adrift in the jungle, just like she had been. She cursed under her breath, frustration building within her. She had come so close, only to find that there was no escape, no salvation waiting for her. Her mind raced as she processed this new information. She was back to square one, stuck on a planet with no way out, no help. But then something caught her eye. In the corner of the cockpit, partially hidden behind a set of metal crates, she saw something glinting. It was a small, cylindrical device, clearly out of place in the otherwise empty room. It looked like a communication beacon, a long-range distress signal. It was set to transmit on a specific frequency, one that wasn't meant for any random passerby. This wasn't just any abandoned ship. It had been waiting here for something or someone. Mara's hand instinctively went to the device, her fingers brushing against it. She froze, a chill running down her spine. There had been no signals from the ship, no sign of any crew, but now she realized the truth. The ship wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for a specific moment, waiting for her. The realization hit her hard. She wasn't alone on this planet. Whoever had set up this ship, whoever had placed this beacon here, was still watching. She wasn't the only one being hunted. Her hand hovered over the button to turn off the beacon, but she hesitated. What if someone out there was waiting for a response? What if she triggered the wrong signal? What if she had just exposed herself to even greater danger? Mara thought quickly, weighing the options. The beacon could be her ticket to survival if used right. If she could send the right signal, she might be able to call for help. But there was another possibility. Whoever had left the beacon here might be as dangerous as the S-Racks, and triggering the wrong frequency might bring a different kind of predator into the jungle. She bit her lip, torn between caution and hope. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. With a steady hand, she activated the beacon, sending a signal out to the distant reaches of the galaxy. The light on the device flashed, confirming that the signal was transmitting. She had made her choice. She couldn't wait any longer. Now she had to find a way to survive long enough for the signal to be received. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing. She would face whatever came her way head-on. She had survived the S-Racks, and she would survive this. Mara moved away from the ship systems and back toward the hatch, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. As she exited the ship, the night air hit her like a wall, cool and fresh, but still heavy with the scent of the jungle. The clearing was still quiet, but the sense of danger had only grown stronger. She scanned the horizon, every instinct telling her to prepare for the unknown. Whoever had left the beacon on that ship was watching. And if they were anything like the S-Racks, they wouldn't hesitate to make her their prey. But Mara was no ordinary human. She had already proven that. She had fought off predators stronger and faster than she could ever imagine, and now she would do whatever it took to survive. The galaxy was vast and it held many dangers, but Mara had learned that she was stronger than she had ever known. She had made it this far and she wasn't going to let anything take that away from her. The hunt wasn't over, not yet.